We're now live, Chair.
Thanks, Kirsty. Well, welcome everybody to the first audit committee meeting of the year since the election. So I know there's a few new faces, including myself. So be kind, everybody, and I hope everybody's gonna support the more experienced people. Will obviously support the newer faces, and special welcome to Councillor Hay as well as a new councillor as well to this committee. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy your time on audit committee.
Thanks very much.
I'd also like to just pay homage to former councillor Stephen Baines. As many of you will know, he was a councillor for a very long time, and also the chair of this committee for nearly a decade. And I can only hope I fill even half of his boots. I'll be doing a good job. So our best wishes to him, and thank you for his service as well. Just a bit of housekeeping, everybody. If you could use the raise hand function if you want to ask a question. Please don't put questions in the chat because the public cannot see them as far as I'm aware. Please do comment if there's any technical issues in the chat, but as a rule, please use the raise hand function and so I can spot you to ask a question or make a comment. Okay, so that's the formalities out the way in the intros. So item number 1, substitutes nominated for this meeting and apologies for absence. Kirsty, I understand we've got one substitution.
We do. We've received apologies from Councillor Baker, and Councillor Evans is substituting on his behalf.
Lovely. Welcome, Councillor Evans. Item number 2, members' interest. Just to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or other interest they may have in relation to the items included on this agenda. If you could raise them either now or throughout the meeting as and when they arise, that would be great. Item number 3, admission of the public. It's not recommended that the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items of business on this agenda. Item number 4, minutes of the audit committee meeting held on the 21st of February 2022 to be agreed as a correct record and signed by the chair. Are there any comments before I ask for a proposer and seconder? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of comments, if it's all right, about the minutes. The first one is on page 6 of the pack. It's minute number 56 and it's resolution C. And this refers to a further report to the audit committee from the finance officer. And we're all aware that Nigel has now retired. And I'm just checking to see whether this item has been carried forward to Chris Forrester for action. Just don't want it to be missed. If we could have an answer to that one. And then I've got a second one, please, Chair, after that.
Yep, no problem. I'm Lisa, is this to you, this question?
I can certainly answer it, Councillor, yes. It has been transferred and it is on the work programme for the 30th of October as an item to be brought to the audit committee then. So Chris Forrester will be bringing that as new head of finance.
Thank you. And the second question is on page 8, it's minute 60. And this referred to the committee considering the possibility of having 2 selected member reports being brought forward to each meeting. And I know that it's a very busy agenda tonight, but there was one that we were expecting to be on the agenda tonight, that being a full analysis of capital projects. And I noticed that that's being deferred to the next meeting. And this is a question for Lisa. I assume this was decided by the previous chair as something that was acceptable.
Lisa, do you want to come in, or I can answer that one?
I can answer it. I'm happy to answer it. It was agreed with the current chair that Councillor Whittaker that this item will be deferred until the next meeting in August, and it is on the work programme. It wasn't as a member selected report, it was as a specific report into the capital programme, and the scope of that report has been agreed with Councillor Whittaker, and it will include details of all capital programmes from the town centre, which members of the audit committee can ask for further information once that report's brought to the next meeting.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Lee. I'll just add on to that. Yeah, that is kind of partly me as well. There was a very quick turnaround from annual council to the papers being issued for this meeting, and I was very conscious it was a very heavy meeting in terms of reports to read. So we thought the best decision was to defer that to the next one. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Chair. I actually haven't got any comments. I wanted to propose the minutes as a correct record as somebody who did attend that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Evans, I can see your hand up. Is that seconding? Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, we just have to ask that all in favour of the minutes.
Yes, we do. Apologies. All in favour? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you very much. That's carried. Okay, item number 5, appointment of deputy chair for the 2022 to 23 municipal year. Get my teeth in. Do we have any nominations, please? Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to nominate Councillor Paul Bellinger as Deputy Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Evans, see your hand up. All in favour? That's great. Thank you. Carried. Councillor Hay, did you have your hand up then? Or was it just to say yes to all that? Yeah, that's fine. No problem.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Right, on to the meaty part of the agenda now. Item number 6 is the member selected internal audit report. And I'm going to hand over to Lisa Hinchliffe as the head of internal audit to add anything she wishes to the report, as we've all had sight of it. So I don't want to waste any time, if possible, to go over the lengthiness of any of the reports tonight. So Lisa, if you've got anything to add before I open up to the floor for questions and comments.
Thank you, Councillor Whittaker. Could I also introduce Stephen Lee, the Assistant Director Strategic Infrastructure, and Andrew Pitts, Assistant Director Neighbourhoods, who were invited along to the meeting with regard to this item. I usually introduce Lachlan McKinnon, who's the audit manager, to introduce this actual item as the member selected report. Lachlan, do you have any additional comments or observations you want to present to the committee that aren't already in the report?
No, nothing major, Lisa. Just to say really that the audit was very much about the value for money aspects of the service provision, and it considered the value for money and the performance management, which we did actually find to be pretty good, the performance management. It was just that the information is not being used by the service, not being monitored by the service, and that was one of the recommendations that we made. But no, nothing else really, other than to say the overall opinion was adequate and remains so at the follow-up stage of the process.
Thank you very much. Martin, would you like to come in?
I would, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say a couple of comments, really. Sorry, first of all, I'm Martin Townsend. I'm the independent member on the audit committee. I've been in independent member for about 6 months, so I'm quite an old hand compared to some new entrants. I just thought, it's a very disappointing response, really, from management. That I suppose I would like to sort of go back in time, if that's possible, to understand the discussions that took place at the time the audit was completed, because there were 6 actions and 3 months timescale agreed for all 6 of them. And then we see when we look at the report, not only was that deadline not met for any of them, and then Audit did their follow-up and it still hadn't been met. And when I read the report, I wasn't even sure that any of the 6 had actually been delivered yet. Although I did see later on in the tracker, in item 13, that that's actually, I think 3 of them have been completed now. I suppose it's just, I think I've made this point at one of the previous meetings, that it doesn't look good when when dates are agreed and not delivered to, stating the obvious, I suppose. But I suppose it's just what sort of consideration was given to the timescale that was set for the 6 of them and 3 months. It's sort of reading it sort of as an independent observer. It just looks as though somebody agreed 3 months and sort of hoped for the best. And clearly, looking at it now, that appears to be, well, unless somebody can explain to me, seems to have been sort of unrealistic and not achievable. And it'd be far better to have proper consideration of the timescale and agree something that people really feel they can commit to. And then you would be delivering and completing audit actions by due dates rather than having audit chasing it. And the sort of report we've got here just sort of feels very feels concerning, really. So sorry, that's a bit negative to start the meeting, but that's my view.
Thanks, Martin. Appreciate those comments. Andrew, have you got your hand up to respond to this particular point? Yes, please come in.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to reassure you, Martin. I mean, we do take audit reports seriously within the service, but one of the things that not all members of the committee may be aware of is that this has been a service that's been in a little bit of not turmoil is probably too strong a word, but has been going through a process of change over the last couple of years. Clearly, we've had all the COVID related stuff, which has caused issues for us all anyway, but essentially we've brought together 2 quite large services, what was called the Safer, Cleaner, Greener service, which deals with parks, open spaces, street cleaning, countryside, forestry and so on. Large service, about 120, 130 staff, together with the highway maintenance function. And that's been done over the last sort of couple of years. So I think one of the reasons why the response has probably not been as timely as it should have been, and I agree with your comments there, has really been that we've got this new management team in place who have been wrestling with a range of issues over the last sort of 18 months or so. What I can say, Chair, is that I'm sure if you want to go through the I think there are 6, aren't there? 6 items in the action plan. I think myself and Stephen will hopefully be able to give the committee some comfort that we have moved forward on some of those, though there's still some way to go. So apologies if it does look as though it's not being given the the sort of attention it deserves, but there are mitigating circumstances, if you like, for that.
Thanks, Andrew. Can I just for my own understanding, as somebody new to the committee and as the chair as well, who does set the deadlines for improvements? Is it a kind of an agreed timescale, or is it the internal audit team who set the milestones? How does that arrangement work?
For me to answer, Councillor Whittaker?
Yes, please. Yeah.
At the conclusion of, before the final report is issued, there is a meeting at the end of the audit to discuss the proposed actions, and it is up to management to propose the date that they see that they can implement the recommendations. So it is a two-way process, but we are led by management saying that this is a reasonable time. Obviously, if we felt as though there was a significant risk, we would encourage an earlier timescale to be agreed, but it is ultimately up to management to determine when they can deliver that action.
Okay. In that case, I share what Martin's saying. If it's management who are setting these and then not hitting them, there's some concern there, because they're not imposed deadlines as such, are they? They're ones that have been realistically, in inverted commas, agreed as timescales that can be met, and it's concerning that they're not being. Martin, did you want to come back on that? You've still got your hand up. Do you want to make a further comment?
Sorry, it's just, I suppose, a legacy hand. I haven't taken it
Oh,
down.
okay, no problem,
But,
no problem.
I think that's what I was just wanting to understand, is sort of what consideration had been given for somebody to think that they could deliver all 6 of them within 3 months. Was that actually realistic then, and the world has changed completely, or was it just overambitious and optimistic, and really they should have been this discussion and negotiating with Audit, maybe 12-month timescale, or whatever they felt was appropriate. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. Councillor Lee, I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Martin's comments, actually. I read it and I was very disappointed that it was only adequate in every category. And whilst I've got good high regard for Andrew Pitts and Stephen Lee, I don't think that the mitigation that's being offered is acceptable to an audit committee. I think that there are 2 aspects of the criticisms that worry me greatly, and they've still not been resolved. And they're noted in the report as having existed throughout the time it was being looked at. And this is that there's been little control of spending. And whenever I hear that in an audit report, all possible alarms go off. And a lack of planning. And that's referred to much later in this report. I won't go there yet, but that refers to business plans being very necessary for various departments to lay down what it is that they plan to do. So I'm concerned about the lack of control of spending. I'm concerned about the lack of progress against the various points that were made. And I do think that now it should be flagged up as urgent for the next meeting that we get some real progress reported on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Stephen Lee Highways, I'll bring you in on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to point out that the monitoring of the spending, we monitor the works budget on a monthly basis. I liaise with finance colleagues. I also liaise with partners in public services, and we have a very strong understanding of what that budget does and what that budget buys. The finance that is being referred to is basically the back office finance, the overheads finance, the staff wages, which Councillor Lee is absolutely right, should be monitored, but it's not the same as monitoring the actual works budgets, which we do on a regular basis.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, really, just to support what has been said so far, Martin got in just ahead of me. I was going to raise exactly the same concerns, and really, I suppose, just confirming what people have been saying. And have we got any specific dates when these can be reasonably expected to be achieved? And should this be brought back to this particular committee just to confirm these things have happened? Because it is worrying, as a number of my colleagues have said. Perhaps we could seek some realistic dates and get them reported to us when they're actually achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I've noted that down as a consideration for further action as a recommendation, which I'll sum up at the end. Councillor Baines.
I think Councillor Dacre was before me, Chair.
Oh, okay. Councillor Dacre.
Not sure I was, but anyway, I'll speak. I just wanted to point out, for the benefit of those watching, that the marking here was adequate, and that reads as key controls are generally in place but are not as effective as they could be within the area examined, increasing the risk of error or fraud occurring. So the ranking above that at that time would have been sound, and the rankings below it were weak. So I think we do just all have to acknowledge again to the public that this is not a wholly bad marking, it's a could do better marking. And I don't think anybody is suggesting we shouldn't do better, but I just think it needs to be seen in context. Thanks.
Councillor Dacre. Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to say here. I think firstly, to me, it's clear that when the proposed date of actions weren't tested stringently enough to see whether or not they were going to be achieved by those dates, and I think that's a point that perhaps Audit should need to take forward as to when they question that with regard to the management, because not just as the initial date being missed, but we're now sitting a second date was missed and a third date was missed. So I think we need to look at whether or not when we set the proposed date of actions, whether or not they're smart, specific, measurable, etc., etc. So I think there's a question there, is that when we do these audit reports, when they come back with regard to recommendations and proposed dates, we really need to test those dates. I don't think anybody would sit here if it said it's going to take us 12 months to complete it. We might question that or go through it, but we would accept it. But when people say all of them are met by the same date and none of them are met, we have to question whether that part. The second thing is, and I have a real thing about this, and anybody who's ever been on any other committee with me over the last 3 years will know this. When we have an action plan and 7.7, we really need on there either A, a RAG status, or B, a proposed revised end date. Because at the moment, going back to the point earlier, we shouldn't be sitting here having those 6 points being raised by the respective, by Andrew and Stephen Lee. It should be in the report, not being verbalised at the meeting. It should actually be in the report for councillors and the independent member to be looking at it beforehand, not being talked about on the night. And that's a point that I always address, as those people have met me on wicker scrutiny and what have you. I will always make comment about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. Those comments have been noted. I can't see anybody else's hand up. So I will move to the recommendations, which is to note the report firstly, and to consider whether any action further action is required. And I think we've identified that there is further action required. So gathering from the conversations that we've had, that we need to look at the proposed dates of action, and we need some specific dates for achieving these improvements, and to include a RAG status also, so that they're not being brought up at the meeting verbally, that they are in the report too in some form. Is that a fair summary of the discussion and the actions we want to recommend as a committee? I'm getting nods. Fab, thank you. Right, lovely. We'll move on to item 7, which is the annual audit report 2020 to 21, external audit report. And I'd like to welcome Ernst and Young auditors. Very warm welcome to those who are attending. And please, is there anything additional to what we have already received that you would like to add this evening?
Thanks, Councillor Whitaker. So my name's Dan Spiller. I'm the Audit Senior Manager for Ernst & Young. My colleague Hassan Rohim is the Audit Partner. A meeting like this, we don't see the worth in sending 2 of us to present one report. And later on in the year, we'll be presenting the audit plan for 22-23. So obviously you've seen the report. I'd normally like to touch on a few things if you want me to do that, or I'm happy to.
Yeah, please do. Just a few headlines would be great.
Yeah, great. And obviously with yourself and Councillor Hay being new to the committee, a lot of this report kind of goes over what we've already reported. So I think it would be good to kind of just touch upon some of those things from the 2021 audit. So I'll use your page numbers in the pack rather than my page numbers. So I've just been transferring those over. So on page 24, we outlined that for 2021, we issued a clean opinion. So no modifications to that opinion. And that the audit was completed on the 11th of January 2022. Now, we also are going to be doing the 21-22 audit in this year, and normally it would normally be for a November deadline. So as you can see, for 2021, we missed that, with the audit being completed in January. So I've already met with Chris as the new head of finance, and we'll be working together to make sure that we get as close to the November 22 deadline for the 21-22 audit, and that work will commence in the autumn of this year. We also issue an opinion on VFM, and that was clean. And later on in the report, there's a lot of commentary on the value for money opinion. But the main headline is that that was once again clean. We will issue our certificate, which formally closes the audit later on in the year. The only thing that's currently holding it up is the work to be done on the whole of government accounts. So your authority, your accounts are consolidated into the wider government accounts, and we can't actually do that work until we've received what we call the group instructions from the auditor of the whole of the government account. So there's nothing that we can do or the yourselves can do currently to speed that process up. We're just waiting for the whole of government accounts audit to commence. Once that's completed, we'll be able to issue your certificate, as I say, formally close the 2021 audit. On page 27, and then this may be more for Councillor Whitaker and Councillor Hay, just some of the other responsibilities that we would report against if we identified anything. Page 29 identifies the risks that we set out in our 2021 audit and our findings against those. And Alan and Nigel will be very pleased before they left to know that we had no findings in all of our risk areas, which is an excellent result for the audit. Page 31 sets out our materiality, so it gives you a flavour of the levels that we look at and would either bring to your attention or kind of errors that we would not be happy with at that level. So I think sometimes there's necessarily a bit of an expectation gap, I think, between what some people might expect themselves to believe as material and sometimes what the audit set out. And that may be that your level may be a lot lower, but sometimes you may actually think that we're looking at things in quite a bit of detail. So I think it's good to point out the levels that we look at. Page 34 onwards. So this is the specific commentary that we issue as part of the auditor's annual report. And this is the first year that you will have received this from your auditors. So in 2020, the NAO code was amended to set out in our audit reporting some more detailed commentary with respect to VFM. So this is set out in the 3 areas of value for money reporting. So governance, financial sustainability, and the 3 E's, which are efficiency, economy, and effectiveness. So that's set out there. Now, I don't intend to go through that because that is quite text heavy, but those are the findings of the areas in which we are meant to report, and we hopefully are only telling you things that you already know if you're familiar with the authority anyway. Page 44 is the bit that attracts the most attention on. It's our fee. So what I can update you on since this report was issued. So the fee for 1920 has now been determined by PSAA. So in the far column where we've set out what we call our scale fee variations, you can see that we were requesting upwards of £73,000 extra to the fee. Now that has been determined by PSAA, who are the arbiter on these things, and we received just over 35,000. So for 2021, you can see the amount that we're going to PSAA to request. Some of that's to do with COVID making things a lot more difficult and giving us lots of things to look at, but some of it is where we feel as auditors that the fee is not representative of the work that we have to perform to give a clean or to give a safe opinion on the audits. So anything that we do put forward to PSA, we'll discuss with management anyway. But normally we expect that there'll be kind of a disagreement anyway, because as an authority, you ask PSAA to appoint your auditor, and you kind of expect the fee that they set to be what you end up paying. So there's been a bit of a movement from that. Saying we submit to PSA and they arbitrate on the fee. So I've gone into probably a little bit more detail you might have wanted, I don't know, but just to give you an idea of what the work we do, and this report is kind of the culmination of everything that we've done in 2021. So I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chair, if you or any of the committee have any.
Thank you, Dan. That was really helpful. Thank you. I've got Councillor Scullion who would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted that we've got a clean bill of health, of course, and that's great. And thank you for the work, and not just the work that the auditors have done, but the way in which you've carried out the work, actually, and the attendance at the audit committee, I think has been very good. Of course, I'm going to register that clearly the fees are too high, but I think I say this every year. But I do particularly understand the argument about the way in which the pandemic has complicated both the volume of transactions and the complexity of some of the transactions, and generally within the council work. I think my final point or question really is about the lateness of the accounts. Now, Ernst & Young were not alone amongst the big accountancy firms in struggling in the same way as the council itself, and many councils were struggling in terms of managing the audit last year. We did actually manage internally extremely well, of course, in Calderdale, and we were on time, but clearly Ernst & Young, like others, were struggling. What are the guarantees, if they can be given, in terms of when, of meeting the November deadline? We've been talking about deadlines in a previous item. What is a prediction in terms of how close you might be to that November deadline?
Okay, so thanks, Councillor Scullion. I think obviously there's going to be a challenge for ourselves and for Chris with new in role, making sure that we're able to achieve that. But so what we can probably look back on over the last few years as your auditor is that we know that Calderdale have a track record of delivering. So that in terms of the way that we will kind of profile and kind of prioritize our audits with a set number of people that we have to deliver the amount of work that we do. Obviously the ones that we know that we can deliver and kind of get good responses from are going to be the ones that we kind of prioritize, because we know that we'll actually get where we need to without delays, and that there'll be fewer issues. So the track record of the team that Chris is inheriting is a good one, and that will definitely make it a lot easier for us to kind of plan for 21-22. In terms of the actual deadline, I wouldn't want to be on record as saying we'll definitely deliver to the November deadline. We will do what we can, and the way that we're resourcing the job, that is possible. But given the kind of, I suppose, the acute shortages that the profession face, that if one person gets ill, it has a much more detrimental effect than it would have done previously, and that that's on both the council side and on our side. But I suppose what we can do is that we will, there are a number of committees between now and then, and we'll alert the committee chair either out of meeting or yourselves at a meeting if there are going to be issues that cause a delay.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion and Dan, for that. Councillor Hay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I was just wanting to ensure I understood the scope of the audit. So I see on page 29, the report says, if we look at the misstatements due to fraud or error, you say we did not identify any material weaknesses of control. But then right towards the end on page 42, under control themes and observations, you say we've adopted a fully substantive approach and have therefore not tested the operation of controls. So I was just trying to understand how those two things fit together, and whether the second statement just means we have to sort of temper our reliance on the first statement.
Yeah, so there's probably a bit of technical jargon that's got a bit lost in some of the words, and I'd probably say that this report, the way it's designed, is to try and break down some of that, Councillor Hay. So it's a bit, I completely understand your point though. So there are, I suppose, two ways that that audits will get assurance. One is through test of controls, and one is through substantive testing. But what we will do, even when we take a fully substantive approach, which is to say that we don't do controls testing, is that we'll kind of walk through systems, and through the course of doing testing, we may identify things that are weaknesses or themes within the internal control environment, which we would bring to your attention. So as an example, we might be testing the bank reconciliation in terms of looking at items on there, but within that we may identify that the bank reconciliation isn't routinely approved or signed off. So although we're not testing the control of the bank reconciliation being approved or being signed off, if we did spot that, we would bring it to your attention. Now, that's not necessarily abstract. We do raise a lot of control recommendations on some audits. So the fact that we haven't reported any control deficiencies in this report is once again a positive sign for this council. And certainly, I think of these reports that I've presented, that's probably in one of the rarer occurrences.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Chris Forrester, welcome first of all to the council as the new head of finance.
Thank you. It's very kind. Just through you, Chair, just to address that point around the timeliness of the accounts, and as Dan has highlighted, we have a track record of being able to deliver here. I know I'm new in post, so I'll be keen to continue that track record of being able to deliver what we need. So for me, the focus will be ensuring we have sufficient resources allocated to support EY while they're doing their testing, make sure the working paper's up to scratch. But it's a solid team. They've done this for a number of years. They know what they're doing. So for me, it's not interfering too much, just make sure they've got the tools that they need so that the council can continue to deliver. So I just thought it was worth pointing that out.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. I've got Councillor Lee and then Councillor Bellinger. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Dan, thank you for your report. I echo Councillor Scullion's kindly comments about your services, particularly, I think, because in the last year with COVID, there's been a lot of ins and outs going on with payments and things that we've been managing for central government, as everybody is well aware. So I just wanted to ask Dan a question of you regarding COVID payments. Presumably, your firm has had a close look at this because nationally, there's been all sorts of talk about payments going astray, let's say, and the scale of it allegedly has been very high nationally. So presumably you've looked at that and you've found that everything is tickety-boo. I just want to feel that that's been very closely looked at. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So the accounting for COVID grants was actually one of the areas of risk that we identified in our audit plan, and then through the course of our work did a lot of work in that area. So we refer to it as an area of focus. So that's kind of one step down from a significant risk of material misstatement. I think it's on page 31 on in the pack. We've reported against that we've not identified anything. But I suppose just to give you a kind of bit more kind of actual detail rather than the words in the report, what we will have looked at a sample of grants that were awarded, either where there were two kind of arrangements in place, one where the council was in receipt of the cash and kind of awarded that cash as principal, or where the council was just an agent for central government money. And we looked at a sample of both types of grant and tested, the kind of whether it was treated correctly, whether the money's gone to I'm sure the thing you'll have been worried about, that the money's actually been paid to an individual or business that was due to receive that or was actually able to receive that. And we've also tested the more accounting side of that, which was the presentation and disclosure of those grants.
Thank you, Dan. Councillor Bellinger.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, I'm actually new to Audit Committee as well, so some of my questions might actually sound silly, to be honest. It's going to take me a couple of months, I think, before I get my head around what's actually done here. The report looks great, to be quite honest. I'm quite impressed with that. And I think one of the things I was sort of wondering is there more that we can do internally as an authority to sort of bring the cost down of these external audit reports? I don't know whether that's a silly question, but I'm always looking for making savings as we go along.
So it's not a silly question. It's certainly something that I think as an authority it's not a cliche to say that the authority is acutely pressured anyway in terms of the accounts, and things are only going to be scrutinised more closely going forward. I think an authority of your size, I think we would probably argue as auditors that the fee reached probably the very lowest it could be, and since that fee was set, probably I think 5 years ago now, there have been quite big increases in the requirements for auditors from our regulator. So some of the committee will have heard Hassan say this a couple of times, but we're under greater scrutiny than ever, which kind of twinned with the fact that the fees went so low, the fees could only go one way. So what's currently happening at PSAA is that from 23-24 there will be a new contract. So that procurement centrally is ongoing now. You may get new auditors from 23-24, but the base fee for your audit will be reset. So the base fee that is the top line on my page, on page 44, is what's called the scale fee, and that's the very minimum that you'll obtain. But say that was kind of set before increases came in on pensions and PPE, and if you think of all the kind of corporate failures that each time the questions asked, where were the auditors, and that the result of that is kind of more scrutiny for us from the FRC, and that unfortunately we have to pass that cost on to yourselves as the authority. And so all these things will result in a new scale fee from 23-24. In terms of things that I think the authority can do, so as an authority, one thing that you have a bit unusual compared to other authorities is a ledger that's it's bespoke ledger. I don't think there are many other authorities that have a bespoke ledger, and that probably leads to maybe only 5 or 6% of that increase, I think, in terms of the work that we do. And the rest of it, I think, is just more around the regulation that we face, and what we think is the costs of the audit being more expensive now than when the fees were set.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that answer. And you do seem very supportive of us. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Bellinger, just to assure you, I had to Google almost every acronym throughout all the reports this evening, so no questions silly, and I'll be certainly asking some of them myself, so so don't worry. Welcome all questions and open and frank discussion. Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. And yes, I mean, I may touch on it later on, but one of the reasons I felt that we should have a slightly larger audit committee was because I thought we needed people who hadn't been on audit committee for years and would ask exactly those sort of questions that they might feel were stupid, but might be a different way of looking at things that people have been around hadn't necessarily, or had just got so used to they didn't think about it anymore. I just wanted to go back to the risks around business grants, and obviously I was around with Nigel when this was happening, and I'd remind people that there were some complaints at the time that Calderdale was slow in getting its business grants out, and there was some slowness that was caused simply by the determination of the team to ensure that they avoided error and fraud wherever they possibly could, because it was public money they were handing out and they had to account to the government for it. And I think that's in stark contrast to at least one other authority where a councillor told me that the primary concern was simply to get the grants out the door because they wanted to be seen to be helping businesses. And my feeling at the time was that they were probably going to end up further down the line finding that they had made errors and had been subjected to fraud. And I was pretty confident at the time that Calderdale would come out very well in those terms. And we're sorry that it did mean in some cases a bit of a delay to make sure that all proper procedures were gone through. But it's no surprise really that we seem to have done quite well on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Dacre. I don't have anybody else indicating they want to speak, so Lisa will correct me if I'm wrong on this comment, but the fee is set as Dan has pointed out, and it's simply for us to receive it rather than approve or otherwise, really. So that is the recommendation on the report, to receive the contents of it and the fee included in that. So can I I'll move that and thank Dan for your time as well. Feel free to go or stay if you feel so inclined. I'm sure you've may have better things to do this evening.
It's nothing personal, but I will take the opportunity.
No, please do. Thank you for your time, and thanks for attending as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 8, which is the 2021 to 2022 Audit Committee Annual Report. This is my report, which I feel not very equipped to answer any questions on, given I'm a very new chair and this is my first meeting. But I will endeavour to answer any comments on it. I have read it quite thoroughly, but the recommendations on this is to approve it and to forward it on to full council. So, Councillor Evans, you would like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. More of a comment, really. I mean, having been involved in it last year, I would say that it's fine as far as I'm concerned, and I'd be happy to move it unless anybody else has got any serious problems. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor Evans.
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. Lovely. I'm glad to hear that it's a fair reflection on the work that's been done over the last year. So thank you. That's made my job very easy for that item.
I think they didn't tell us they would have our photos in it though for next year though. They snuck that one on us, didn't they? Before when they asked us to appear on this committee.
They did. Right. Okay. Item number 9. Audit Committee self-assessment. I will hand over to Lisa again for this one before I open it up for questions.
Thank you, Chair. This, as the report says, is the opportunity for the Audit Committee to do a self-assessment. This was based on questionnaires within the SIP for guidance. The aim is to enhance Audit Committee effectiveness if there is a need to do that. The recommendations in the report are to consider the self-assessment questions, which were detailed in 5.1 of the report, and any areas for development and improvement. And I've also included in that report some proposals, some other suggestions for how the Audit Committee can move forward and enhance what it does. Just an apology to start with. The report does make reference to two Appendix Cs. The second one should be Appendix D, and the reference at 5221 should be Appendix D, not Appendix C. So it's really for members to consider that self-assessment. You can see the scores that the average scores that members put in there, along with comments for improvement. So I suppose the discussion point is whether members have any other suggestions in terms of, how we get wider engagement. I do think there needs to be a skills assessment of members, particularly as we've got a lot of new members on the Audit Committee. I do think that should be something we propose moving forward to do. There is going to be some training for Audit Committee members, which I've discussed with the Chair, which hopefully that will help to identify where we might need more development for Audit Committee members. At 522, I've made reference to the regional forum for Audit Committee chairs. The chair's confirmed that she will be engaging with that forum and is going to attend the meeting in July and will feed back to the committee. I do make reference as well to the SIP position statement and the additional guidance which is due out next month, which will be considered, and other guidance on self-assessments for the Audit Committee in the coming years. So happy to take questions on proposals.
Thank you, Lisa. I just have one question before I bring members in. Just on the communication side of things, do we do anything at the moment with the public, or is it largely been focused on how we get more members engaged and proactive in the work of the committee?
It's been both in some ways. It is open to members of the public, and I suppose the annual report of the Audit Committee makes that clear, but the committee is, for the members of the public. So we don't get many members of the public joining the Audit Committee. Whether we've had more viewings when it's been published like it is, I'm not sure, but do we need to do more work on that? but how do we do that?
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
Appreciating as well that as we've identified this evening, that the technicality of the committee and the workload and the language of that's used is potentially alienating to a lot of people. So that needs to be taken into consideration as well. Councillor Baines, I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. I think one, I think we all accept that this is not a sexy subject. You know, I think it is, and I think also that the work done by this committee is often seen as is in the dark and almost secretive. And I think that's true by residents and members. And I think there's a lot of members. I mean, I sit on audit committees for other organisations, so I'm aware of this audit committee. But I think there's a lot of other members who isn't. And I thought some of the average scores there were quite high. When I've spoken to other members about what we do here, I think there is a big need for actually explaining the importance of this committee. I understand I was slightly tongue-in-cheek when I started, but yes, it is very technical. But I think the importance of this committee should not be understated and underestimated. And I think Councillor Baker's point about getting this committee expanded and getting new members on it was actually a very, very good one and a very valid one. And I think that's something we need to look at ongoing, and whether or not we actually only sit for a certain level at a certain term, and then we bring new people on board to get that wider engagement within members first and then residents as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. I know that the new guidance that's coming out does recommend at least 2 independent members for committees, and obviously we've got Martin on board, and I understand it took a while to get that going. So obviously another independent or even another 2 independent would be very welcome in my view. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. That was exactly my point about the independent members. I do echo again Councillor Barnes' comments. This is an absolutely essential committee, and I think it's different to many of the other council committees in that you know, most of the time I think we put our political differences to one side and look at the very best way that we can organise and control in a proper manner the activities of this council. And yes, Chair, the point that you've just made, I was going to raise perhaps more formally, that in my opinion, having been on the committee for a couple of years, is that it's been a great success having Martin on this committee as an independent member. And as you quite rightly say, and Lisa advised us last night, that the latest guidelines are that there should be 2 independent committees if possible. And in view of the time that it took to find Martin, and we're very lucky to find you, but it did take a while. I think that whilst it could be argued that we're okay at the moment, I suggest, Chair, that we start looking to fill a second position, because if it takes the time it took to fill the first one, we don't know where we'll be. You know, it could be next year before we get a member. So I do think that that's a good thing to be doing, and I recommend, Chair, that perhaps you move that at the end of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. That's been noted. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, and thank you for the discussion so far. I actually found doing the questionnaire very interesting. I thought doing the questionnaire in itself is a training tool in some ways for the committee, because as you go through it, you reflect on, are we okay on that, or could we do better? So actually doing the questionnaire I thought was a developmental tool. I've said this previously, but I do think the SIPFA and the LGA finance training is very good, really, and I would recommend it in terms of understanding local government finance, not just the initials, but the overall way in which it's conducted. And I think that, I wonder if it's, as well as having an additional external person on the committee, I wonder if in terms of raising the committee's profile, whether there is space within the council meetings agenda once a year at least, to actually have a report from the chair and the external auditor in terms of this is what audit's doing. And I know that it's seen as unsexy, but actually every member is interested in risk. You know, what is the level of risk within this council? Every member is interested in the money and whether we are actually managing our budgets and keeping control of them. And every member is interested in governance and how we conduct ourselves and manage the decision-making processes. So I think that risk, finance and governance model would actually make quite a good report to council, and perhaps raise the profile a bit of the committee at that point. But I just want to say thank you to Internal Audit really for bringing the questionnaire forward, because I thought it was reflective, but it was also a useful educational tool in itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Councillor Lee, is that a legacy hand, or are you wanting to ask? No, okay. Martin Townsend, please come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to say that I've shared with Lisa some thoughts in terms of the questionnaire for next time. A questionnaire that I've been involved with another organisation where I'm on the audit committee. So I think she's going to have a look at that in terms of the questions that are posed, because I think, as Councillor Scullion said, you know, the questions do get you thinking a bit in terms of how you think it should be. And I know this is an annual exercise, but I just sort of wonder, given the number of changes that have been on the committee, whether you might actually think about doing it more sooner than annual. I don't know what Lisa thinks about that. Just to get the views from, I mean, maybe give it a couple of meetings for the newer members to actually form a view in terms of how the meeting operates. So I think it's partly about how it conducts its business as well as what it actually does. I think that's worth focusing on.
Thank you, Martin. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for those comments, Martin. Yes, I am going to consider the questions that you shared with me. And I do wonder whether once we've done some training with audit committee members, we should do some sort of survey or some sort of questionnaire on that basis to gauge people's understanding and where there's perhaps more development work and more understanding of how the committee works. So maybe time it like that.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I'm just looking at 5.2, where the proposals to assess and improve the effectiveness of the audit committee. There is, as you've all read, there is a new Yorkshire and Humberside Audit Committee of chairs, which I will be joining. I think the next meeting is on the 6th of July in Huddersfield, so I'll be keen to attend those going forward. The second proposal is in relation to the new guidance that's going to be issued, and I think we've expressed a view that we would like to have at least one more independent on board, just to give a bit more diversity to the skills that we have on the committee. And thirdly, there is a suggestion for an independent review of our effectiveness. There is a cost attached to this, and nobody's actually mentioned this on this item. Just wondered if anybody had a view on whether that would be a worthwhile exercise. Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, that's something I've also discussed with Lisa, again, experience at another organisation, but I think there's different ways you could do this. The simplest I would have thought was something like external audit. I mean, Dan's just been here, presumably he goes to other similar meetings. You know, would he provide a free view even in terms of, you know, without charging for, you know, how does this one compare to other ones? You know, what do we do well? What could be done differently? And another organisation, they actually commissioned a sort of a separate review by as part of a wider governance review, really, to look at the audit committee, and it was the board meetings as well. And then somebody attended and provided views as an observer, that type of thing. So I think I suppose it depends what your budget is in terms of how you might approach this. But I think that would be very useful to have that. I mean, I can provide some perspective. It might be if you get another independent member, they may be involved with other audit committees, or I think was it Councillor Baines said he was involved. So I mean again, you know, people who are involved in similar committees can say how they feel this one works compared to others. But I think it's always good to get some really sort of independent external perspective, isn't it?
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
If you've got the budget.
Yeah. And hopefully Councillor Scullion can shed some light on that. Is there a budget for you know, doing something like that? Do you know, or maybe Lisa knows?
We will ask Chris and Lisa to go away and look into that. I think that's what the minutes should say. Could I make two, please, Chair? One
Yes.
is that this is a reconstituted, reformed committee this year. I would suggest a couple of meetings to settle in before there's any external audit or view, really, just common sense. And my second thing, Chair, is a plea, which is that not everybody on an audit committee needs to be an accountant. And actually, it's important that we have a mix of people. We as councillors are lay people with different professional backgrounds. And I think that mix is very healthy, really. So when we're looking at skills, if we can keep in mind, and we do a skills audit, that we need a range of skills in an audit committee. So thank you.
Well, thank you for raising that, Councillor Scullion, and I'm glad you have, because I, for one, don't have a background in accountancy or finance in particular. And, you know, it can be quite intimidating coming onto a committee where everybody has that skill set and that knowledge to feed in and give perspective on. And I do share the view that it should be mixed, because there are different skills that others won't have that we still need. So thank you for those comments. Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. I'm not one either, so I can't even add up, but I know everybody says accountancy isn't to do with adding up, but anyway. I was just going to go back to the external review, and Lisa had mentioned the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. I just wondered, is that something that would be particularly useful for reviewing us in a local authority context? Do they understand local authorities perhaps better than some other organisations might, or was it just a suggestion and you're not particularly wedded to it, Lisa?
It was just a suggestion. I approached Ian Hughes to see if he could suggest anybody, and I went through Mike Lodge, and he suggested this organisation as somebody he had contact with, and I made contact with them. They confirmed they could do it for a fee. They did have the expertise to do it, but I'm sure that there are other ways that we could do it. And I think some suggestions have been put forward for ways we could do it, perhaps without paying a fee. Maybe it's something that we just keep on the radar and consider in the future.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Scullion.
Sorry, I don't know if I need to, but I just wanted to declare an interest in that I was a former employee of the Centre for Public Scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. I don't have anybody else indicating, so I will move that we note the proposals in 5.2, which I mentioned earlier, all of which have been discussed, and that includes Councillor Lee's suggestion of getting the ball rolling on getting a second independent onto the committee. I will go away as well and speak with Lisa and with Chris. We'll give time for the new members of the committee to embed, and then we will explore some options about how to independently assess how we are working effectively as a committee. Can I move that and ask if all are in favour of that? Thank you very much. Thank you. That's carried. Okay, item number 10, we're nearly there. Risk Management Annual Report 2021 to 2022. I'm handing over to Lisa again for this one.
Thank you, Chair. Can I introduce our Corporate Risk Manager, who's Martin Blower, and he's here to talk to the report in terms of new developments and add anything new to the report, and are here to take questions from members as well.
Thank you. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I may briefly talk to the report. there are 3 new updates which have happened since the report was circulated. As part of positive risk insurance, the Council's Insurance AIG carried out site surveys, primarily at 4 of our key heritage sites for fire risk, and the overall feedback from the insurers is very positive, with the Council having demonstrated the sound management of risks. In the report at 5.3.3, there's an item about the Children's Social Care Risk Management Group. In recognition of the work that's being carried out by this group, it has actually been shortlisted now for the Collaborative Working Award in this year's Calderdale Our Stars Awards. And finally, the only reviews of the Strategic Risk Register now will go from this committee on to the corporate leadership team for consideration, along with 2 new risks which the potential thought of, which is the difficulties of recruiting and retaining staff, and also potentially fraud. Just also to reiterate that obviously risk management continues to be a key part of service delivery, and to assure members that we do everything we can in a sometimes challenging risk environment to ensure that services continue to be delivered efficiently and hopefully risk-free. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Martin. I have a couple to start us off with. I have to admit, I found this incredibly difficult to read. It was far too wordy for my liking. I struggled to understand the monetary figure attached to the risks if they materialised, and to work out how far away are we from those risks potentially materialising. I just couldn't get that information from what I was reading, and I equally failed to understand where the council's risk appetite was. You know, the figures in terms of risk and likelihood of it happening and the impact it had meant very little to me without knowing where we were on the scale of that appetite, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. We can break down the RAG ratings to show what the risks are without the actions in place, and what they are with the actions in place, and how those actions mitigate the risks. So you get a different, obviously a different RAG rating for unmanaged and for managed risks. And also we can also offer training on the management of risks, and a very brief training, but something to go through just to understand how the risk registers are put together and how they work.
Yeah, I think that would be it might be my kind of naivety on that, but I struggled to link it all together with what trigger was linked to what risk and consequence and etc. and what was the monetary value attached to that, and also what I just struggled to link it all, was my view. Martin, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, yes, I'll just sort of echo, I think, what you've just said there. I had a few questions which I actually raised with Lisa prior to the meeting, and she was able to address all of those for me, so I didn't feel the need to raise them here. But I think you're right in that there's a level of detail, or a sort of, if you like, the working level, which isn't shown here. There's more that sits behind this. And we do see, we haven't got one this time, but we do normally have a report, the risk register from one of the directorates, don't we, at each of the meetings. So there's a chance to do more of a deep dive, I suppose, into a particular area, which is, I think, I've found useful so far. But I think Martin's right. I think it's probably something better done separately. And there was a risk management training session, I think, last year, wasn't there? I seem to remember going to that. It can't be that long ago. Maybe 6 months ago, was it? I think. So I mean, I think there is more that sits behind this, and it's probably worth having a separate session or sessions to sort of, I suppose, bring members up. Improve the understanding, I suppose, if that makes sense. Yeah,
it does, Martin. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Is that fair, Martin, to say that?
Yeah, I must agree that obviously, because I spend day in, day out working with it, for me it's second nature, and I tend to forget that some people coming to this new and fresh will perhaps find it a little detailed, and I'll ensure it is clearer next time round.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you. Those are helpful comments. I think that perhaps the time again for the new committee has come for us all to have a bit of a refresher on risk and risk from a Calderdale perspective. I mean, local government generally is traditionally very risk averse and in a number of ways. I think the point that Martin made about how it is in Calderdale, really, I think is a useful part of our overall risk training as an audit committee of kind of getting a feel of the point that you made, Chair, about our risk appetite as opposed to other sectors and indeed other councils. And some of the data we've got from the audit family of comparators and so on gives perhaps some better indication. But I would certainly welcome some further risk management refreshment training this coming year.
Yeah, I'll make sure I speak to member development about that, as well as the session that we have planned later on as well. Thank you for those comments. Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. Yes, I had the benefit of going on, I assume it was LGA training on this, and it was really helpful for helping you to understand risk registers, because they are done in ways in which you don't always think, even to determine what is the risk. And it was quite clear on this course that lots of councils, so the equivalent of Martin Blower and the officers behind him who are setting the risk, don't actually understand how to define a risk in the first place. So it is really quite challenging, and I think training is absolutely essential, because what was really noticeable on the course that I went on was that a large number of councillors had been sent from the councils where things had gone horribly wrong, because audit committees and their equivalent who were there to deal with risk simply had been inadequate. They didn't understand what they were supposed to be looking at. They didn't even realise they were supposed to be thinking about risks. And that's why audit committee, and I think I've said this in council, it's absolutely crucial that audit committee does understand these things and does look into them, because we're one of the safeguards that there are to ensure that our council not only recognises risk, but takes the appropriate steps to deal with it. And that doesn't always mean that you will avoid it, because sometimes you can't do anything, but you can do everything you can to try to manage it. And part of that is, as you say, Councillor, it's knowing, Councillor Whittaker, it's knowing what your appetite to risk is. So yeah, I think training for us all would be really, really helpful.
I agree. Thank you, Councillor Dacre. Councillor Baines.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say I like this report. Maybe we've identified in meeting one the nerd of the group, but yeah, I liked it, and I liked it for the reason that it was quite clear. It was clear to understand things, even though it was a very heavy report. I do agree with you on that, Chair. It is a heavy report, but I think in terms of some of it having the risk score, the likelihood, the impact, actually that allowed you to focus on key areas. I think there's two things I've missed, and I think I agree with the training. I think it would be I think what's missing is that easy to link into what are the consequences for the council. I think that's the step that's missing within this report. It's a very, very good detailed report for people, as Martin pointed out, who live and breathe this. For elected officials, it's that next level that we need to really make this an outstanding report, in my view. But hey, I'm quite happy always to be sitting on the other side to other people. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Baines. Councillor Hay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so one general point and then one specific point. So I did think that the landscape pages showing specific risks were quite difficult to follow, and I would suggest that perhaps sort of marrying up the triggers and the mitigations sort of across the page might be useful, because I did see specifically that there was a trigger around inappropriate access to systems, and there didn't appear to be any mitigation at all. So I think, for me that's quite a big one. So I think just sort of redesign. I'm sure there are mitigations there, so I think it's just redesigning it a little bit would be good.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor here, and I share that sentiment as well. I did find it difficult to link the particular triggers to the consequences and what measures are associated with which trigger, and it just seemed to be lists to me of them all. So that, yeah, that would be helpful. Just a final question from me, Martin. Does this take into account contingency measures for like unknown unknowns? So COVID, for instance, is that taken into account when looking at risk?
Well, COVID was a separate risk register entirely because of the severity of the issue. So when COVID struck in the beginning of 2020, there was a risk register designed then, which covers specifically COVID, but was linked back into the strategic register where it affected the strategic register itself. But that was a separate item outside this, because otherwise it would have taken over most of the strategic register.
Appreciate that, but I'm likening COVID to the things we don't know about, if that makes sense. Is there kind of contingency measures for things that could come our way, but we just don't know about them? I think they're called black swans, aren't they? I don't know.
We continually horizon scan and work with colleagues and other authorities to try and find out what's happening, what's the next big thing that's going to come along, which is why I say we're looking at these two new risks to come in, because obviously these are areas which are starting to become a concern in other authorities as well as here. So we work with other authorities quite closely.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Councillor Bellinger.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was sort of like looking somewhere else, and you might have actually been talking about what I was looking at, and that was there's 020 failure to ensure cybersecurity. Obviously, I saw the red mark at the top there, and just wondered, is that where we actually are at the moment, or that's where we could actually be if we don't comply with the risk sort of like assessment here? I'm used to looking at the KPIs and super KPIs with the colour charts there as well. So obviously red to me is something that we need to address. So looking at this, is this something that we do need to address, or is this something that could happen if we don't address it?
That interestingly is one of the difficult risks, because obviously cybersecurity, we have a lot of information on what's out there as for hacking. We have firewalls, we have everything in place with the information technology systems. However, the likelihood is that no matter what we have in place, and some authorities have far more in place than we do, it only takes one person to have a phishing email and your system's doomed. So in fact, it's a red risk, because it's impossible to reduce that risk any further because of that, or somebody finds a backdoor into your system which you didn't know about. So you can have whatever firewall you like at the front. If somebody opens that email that's coming through the system, and you just open it up, and somebody can then break straight into the system, it's all gone. Doesn't matter how many millions you spent on the front end.
Right, I appreciate that. So yeah, so that's always going to be a risk to us, and there's no way we can mitigate against that risk. It's always going to be something that's there. We've just got to be very cautious of what we do, I guess.
Yeah, I know the cybersecurity people do a lot of training, that they do exercises on for getting people to spot phishing emails, send regular e-calls around saying, this is the latest phishing email, please be aware of it. But there are the people who are going to hack into your system are always one step ahead of the people who are trying to stop you.
Appreciate that, Martin. And again, I'll just echo what everybody else has said regarding the training as well. Yeah, I think I would certainly appreciate some training on this. Thank you,
Councillor Bellinger. Martin, I'll bring you in, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Yeah, just briefly, I was just going to say there was a very helpful report on cyber security risk. I think it was at the last meeting, Martin. I think it was.
It was, yes, it was brought to the last meeting.
So I think if anybody's not seen that, it'd be worth digging that one out to have a read of that. And I guess what you're saying is, despite the mitigating actions in place, it's still red.
Yes, because we can't guarantee that we can stop everything, no matter what you put in as a firewall.
Okay. Sorry, Martin. No, sorry. I thought you'd finished.
No, it was just going to say that, as was mentioned before, all these strategic risks were brought individually to this committee in the past. People could discuss them through at length, and if it would be appropriate, we could perhaps look at that when we've done the Directorate Risk Registers, re-bring these to refresh members on what they're doing and the changes that have taken place since they last saw them.
Yep, I'm seeing a few thumbs up on that, so thank you for that suggestion. I'll move that along with just to note, the recommendation is to note the council's risk management arrangements for 2021 and 2022, and the future work which will continue to support the council in meeting its priorities and ambition. All in favour of that? Fabulous, lots of hands up, that's great. Thank you very much, members. Okay, item number 11. Internal audit report and opinion 2021 to 2022. I'm handing this over to Lisa again. Sorry, before I do, Councillor Lee, do you have a question beforehand or on this item?
No, sorry, it's for this item after Lisa spoke.
Okay, no problem. I'll bring you in shortly. Lisa, anything to add to your report?
Thank you, Chair. It is a long report, so I don't propose to go through it all. Just to note that 8.3 I have provided an unqualified opinion backed up by the detail in the report and the reasons why. You will note, however, that I have identified some areas that are issues which I believe need to be included in the annual governance statement for 21-22, and that will be brought to the committee in August at the next meeting. I just wanted to highlight some new issues that are awareness and points to note in the report. There is a new sit for publication about internal audit. It's called Internal Audit Untapped Potential, and it does give a bit of a snapshot of the current state of internal audit. I do propose to bring this to the audit committee at a future meeting. I'm going through that with the team to identify whether there's anything that we can learn and do differently. That includes engagement across the authority, engagement with the senior leaders, engagement with the audit committee. So I think it's appropriate for the audit committee to see that and consider it. Going back to the first item that we considered today, the member selected report, where members quite rightly identified some recommendations where officers had agreed actions and then hadn't taken them in a timely manner. Internal audit's usual reporting process is for follow-up audits to be done where there's an overall opinion of limited and a paper follow-up for all other overall opinions. Because we have noticed that there are some recommendations that aren't being implemented and they drag on, from this current year, we are actually following up on all recommendations until we have confirmation from management that they've actually implemented the recommendation. It is still management's responsibility to do it, but we felt it was important to keep that on track, and we will report that by exception basis to the audit committee, probably through the tracking report, but certainly as part of my annual report at the end of the year. If there are any recommendations that have been made that haven't been implemented, audit committee members will be made aware of it. So that's related to 5.6, where you can see that control environment has improved in most audits, but that doesn't say the full picture because there are some individual recommendations that haven't been implemented. Just to give members some assurance in terms of the performance indicators, which is in 6.6 of the report, which is page 134, it does show that a slight deterioration in the qualified internal audits being qualified. Just to give you some assurance, where we have got unqualified auditors, all of them are on a professional programme. So they're either undertaking IIA or SITFA, with the exception of one member of staff, and they're supervised, and there's procedures and manuals in place. Just wanted to give members that assurance there. 7.4 is where we talk about the governance and the assurance mechanisms in place. I do believe there's more to be done to highlight and embed the importance of governance. It does detail there the steps we've taken so far, the reintroduction of the governance group, and reporting to ELT, CLT, but I do believe there's more to be done. And the fact that there are areas which have been adequate for a number of years does indicate that the direction of travel does need to improve in some of those areas, and we're proposing to report that through to the governance group, but we can bring that to audit committee members should members want that. Happy to take any other questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say, I hope this doesn't sound wrong, Chair, but this is a sexy subject for me. And I love numbers. So a bit like Councillor Barnes, I think, we're weirdos. But anyway, what I wanted to just say under this item, first I must say to Lisa, thank you for the report. And I find it absolutely amazing and fantastic how comprehensive your work is with your small team. And I think it's a great report and it gives me great comfort. But I wanted to nail something from before, and I did say very early on in the meeting that something appears much later. And on this, you don't need to refer to it because I'll just allude to it briefly now, the spoken word. But on para 528, page 132, it refers to progress with business plans. And if you'll all recall, we were talking about business plans when we were talking about the maintenance situation, road maintenance earlier. And I wanted to, again, agree with Councillor Barnes because his comments earlier on coincide with mine. I believe in deadlines. I like to see exception reporting. I want to know when we plan to do things, and if we don't, why we didn't, why, by how much did we miss it, and how we're going to put it right. So what I want to do is put down some deadlines tonight somehow, or agree that we'll talk with Lisa and the team about setting achievable targets for business plans in all of the appropriate departments to be undertaken and stuck to, and variations reported against plans, and get a diary together so we can see that we're making progress. What we heard earlier on, for me, was totally unacceptable, actually. So hopefully we'll be able to do that, and maybe the other members will embrace that idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Barnes, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it's important as well is that when we do set those deadlines, that those deadlines are tested before they're put into the public domain or into it, to make sure that we're not just over promising to make us look good. As I said earlier on, I don't mind if someone says it's going to take us 6 months because it's a genuine 6 months. I prefer that than someone who says it's going to take us 6 weeks when it's really going to take us 6 months. So I think we do need to make sure we test those deadlines when individuals say they're going to be doing it by that, and just make sure and double check that. Just a little bit of a sanity check for those of you who know the Marx Brothers. That's very important. Secondly, and which is the pedant on me, page 144. Did I miss why one of the bubbles was actually shaded differently? Have I missed that? As well as a weirdo, Councillor, I'm also a pedant.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. I'm not sure on the shading. Lisa, do you want to clarify on that?
I can. The reason why that one is shaded, it says at the bottom of the key, there was no return for 21-22 when I published this report. So that actually signified the assessment rating from the previous year, 2020-21. I can confirm that that return has been sent and I got it today. And the opinion is adequate again.
Thanks, Lisa, for that clarity. Martin.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to ask that specific point on, it seems somewhat ironic that a team with the name standards in their name should deliver their response, well, so late. I thought they hadn't delivered it at all, but hardly setting an example, really. I just wonder why that had not been delivered earlier.
Do we know, Lisa?
I can't provide a reasonable explanation. It just wasn't, and it wasn't for the want of trying and chasing, and that's why we've actually finally got it today. So I haven't got a reason or an excuse or whatever you want to say. It just wasn't provided by the deadline, but we have got it now.
Okay, thank you. I think, I mean, overall, I think from what I read from this, I think as I'm not sure whether Councillor Lee said that all the great work that Audit are doing, and it seems that I'm not sure they can do any more really in terms of trying to drive improvement in the council, and it's really down for the directors and the corporate leads to take ownership and to improve, to get their own houses in order, isn't it? I suppose the assurance statements map does show, I suppose, overall it's adequate, and there's lots of scope for improvement, isn't there, in many areas. So I think where there is scope for improvement, then we'd expect to be hearing about the deficiencies and the steps being taken to address those gaps at this committee in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Lisa, just off the back of that, could I just ask if our services asked for a reason for delays, and how do you determine what's a good reason, what's not?
Do you mean delays in responding to audit recommendations? In taking action?
Yeah, or any delays really in hitting deadlines or responding to you or anything like that. Do they have to provide a reason?
Well, sometimes we might get somebody ahead of time saying, I'm really sorry, I can't provide a response because of X reason, Y reason, you know, somebody's off sick, somebody's off or whatever, and we would be reasonable and give an extension on that deadline in terms of responding back. And equally, if the response came back to say that something else has happened, so therefore we can't actually deliver, you know, it might be that we need some IT input, so it's out of our control. We need IT on board with this, and they've got priorities, so that's stopping progress. So we do ask for that feedback, and we do get it on some occasions, but not always. And often the response is it's capacity and time, which is why we're back to the first point that everybody's making: make it realistic in the beginning. You know, don't set unrealistic expectations.
Yeah,
which we do have that conversation.
Yeah, but they're the ones that have the knowledge about what's realistic and not. You don't have that knowledge, so you're largely going off what they're telling you, which we appreciate. Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. It wasn't about that point that I was coming in, but I suppose one thing I would say is that if you are having difficulties with this feedback, Lisa, one thing to do is speak to the cabinet member who covers that for help with trying to get reports if you have that trouble again. But what I just wanted to say in relation to the targets for business plans, as Councillor Barnes has said, if we were to do this, they've got to be realistic and achievable, and we'd need input from the commercialisation team on that, because they're a very small team. They're the ones who go through the business planning process with different teams within the council, and so they can only do so much at once, and they have to prioritise. So without their input, it's impossible for the other officers in the council really to give any promises about when they could do it. So we would need to speak to them.
Thank you, Councillor Dacre. Councillor Bellinger and then Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, again, at the end of the day, we need to be speaking to our officers and letting them understand that our expectations are high in receiving things in a timely manner. I don't think it's fair that we actually set those timescales, because we're not the ones that are actually dealing with the roles. We don't know what it takes, what they need to be able to respond and complete what they need to do. But I think we need to be sort of like pinning them down to a realistic timescale. They need to be saying, right, fair enough, we can get this done in 3 months, 6 months, whatever. and then hold them to account if they haven't actually achieved that in the timescale that they've personally set, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Bellinger. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I don't quite know how to say this, but I think that one of the reasons why this report was late might be, and I do think this should be mentioned at this audit committee, the standards at very high levels in this council have been severely tested and challenged during this year. And I don't know whether any sort of reporting back on this was delayed because of that situation. Everybody that's a member of the council knows what I'm alluding to, and I do think that you know, there must have been some questions asked which couldn't be answered satisfactorily in the time, and that's all I can surmise, because otherwise this ought to be a report that's readily produced and easily understood. So yeah, you know, it's something that's happened which I do think audit should at least be interested in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I just have one question, Lisa. Just, well, it might be an obvious one. Does the internal audit team have a business case? And does that, if it does that include building upon the commercial auditing service that, because obviously you do some academies in Calderdale. Is there any plans or thoughts going into maybe extending that, appreciating that you're one person down in your team? But is there a long-term plan to commercialise your team more?
I can confirm that there is a business plan in place. And in terms of work with academies, we do continue to promote the service in every way we can. We did consider whether we extended that to other local authorities, but the capacity in the team means we can't do that unless we expanded the team. And obviously you're competing against other audit teams in other local authorities. So we're not taking that step to go external to the council, but we will take on any academies that are within Calderdale.
Okay, thank you for that. Martin.
Yeah, just thanks, Chair. Just to come back sort of quickly on this point around management requesting extensions to the agreed dates. So that's a discussion with audit, isn't it? And audit would agree to that extension if they felt that was appropriate and it was a good story, if you like, that they were satisfied with. I mean, the committee could take more interest in that. I mean, another organisation involved with any request for extensions beyond the target date come to the audit committee itself. So you could say then, you know, you'd actually get a better understanding of what's going on and where there's any slippage or sort of extension being requested. But you might feel that's too much detail to get bogged down in. But that's an idea.
Good point. Lisa, do you want to respond to that at all?
If I'm perfectly honest, we don't get a lot of requests for extensions. They often just go beyond the deadline. You'll see on the tracking report, which is the later item, you know, we show on there if it's gone past the deadline date in terms of the response to the audit or the response to the follow-up. So we do report on it, but it's at the time of the audit committee, so we'll come on to that later. But you know, some of them where they're showing awaited or due have now been received, so they were late in effect, but we've got them now. I feel as though internal audit are managing it. They are reminding. I do go to DM directorate management teams as well, where I highlight to the director and the senior people within that directorate where there are delays. I'm happy to bring it to audit committee if that's what members want, or they want it by exception. I mentioned earlier about reporting by exception recommendations which haven't been implemented, which that is my concern if things aren't implemented. You know, there is a concern if there's a delay, but ultimately if it's delayed and it's still implemented, we've got the improvement ultimately.
Thanks, Lisa. Councillor Dacre, and then I'll we'll move on.
Okay, thank you. Well, it was just to say really that I'm not sure that we would want Audit to be bringing too many things back to us, because we'd end up micromanaging it, and that's what internal audit is for. Clearly, Lisa's saying to us that they're now taking a slightly different attitude to try to ensure that things are followed up on. And in a way, they shouldn't be having to do that, because that should be the senior managers who do it. So I think if you start bringing us into all of those, then you're just distracting us from looking at the wider picture, when it's the wider picture that Lisa should be reporting to us on. So I'd just caution before we start getting too bogged down in individual cases like that.
Appreciate those comments, Councillor Dacre, thank you. Okay, so the recommendation on this report is to first approve it and confirm the work that's being carried out by internal audit is regarded as effective, which I think the consensus is that it is, and to take into account the findings from the report when considering the review and approval of the annual governance statement. Just off the back of discussions that we've had as well, may I also suggest that, much like or similar to the work plan that we have some kind of working document on the business plans and targets specifically, and if there are any exceptions of any material delays, that those are also included on that, and that is reported to the committee. I'll move all that actually in a block, and please do shout if you have any objection to that last suggestion. So all in favour of that? Wonderful, thank you all, that's great. Okay, right, item number 12 now. So this is the Internal Audit Services Annual Audit Plan for 2022-23 and Internal Audit Charter. Lisa, back over to you for this one.
Thank you, Chair. Not really a lot to say on this. It's self-explanatory. This is the plan for the audit team for the coming year. Safe to say we're already 2 months through it, and good progress has been made. We did take this to corporate leadership team prior to the start of the year to get their approval and get their comments on any concerns that they had. So have encompassed those within the plan moving forward. We are looking at trends that come out of audits. Could mention this here, I could mention the tracking report. In particular, we've noticed on the first school audits we've done this year to date, 3 of them have been given a reasonable opinion, and that looks to be a deteriorating trend. We've looked at where the issues are in there, and actually in order to do some proactive work, we are well, I'm speaking to Directorate Management team in Children's Services to get their thoughts, but our proposals are to actually communicate with all schools and give guidance on those areas that have been identified. They're not weak or limited, but they're adequate. So to provide some guidance to those schools about what standards should be in place. Nothing more to say really, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I don't actually have anybody indicating. I think you've got away with that. Right, okay, so the recommendation on this, if there are no comments or questions, is to approve the internal audit plan and the internal audit charter. All in favour? Thank you, everybody, that's carried. Moving on to item number 13, which is the Internal Audit Services Tracking Report 2022 to 23. Lisa, again.
Thank you. Again, not a lot to say on this one really. I've given some updates in terms of our proposals for following up on recommendations that have been implemented and the trend in the school audits. a couple of updates in terms of we've done 3 physical follow-ups in the year to date. We do those physical follow-ups where there've been limited opinions given on all 3 of those audits. The updates aren't on the report that you've got, but they've all moved from limited to adequate. So there are some outstanding recommendations which have been made to management on those. Again, happy to take questions. This is the report where members select which reports they would like to see at the next audit committee meeting. 1 or 2 reports are usually selected, and happy to take comments and suggestions on that.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Really just following on from the previous item in relation to lack of achievement in certain areas. I think it's important to highlight the difference between recommendations accepted and recommendations implemented, which we've had lots of discussion on, but being very specific when we look at this list. Town boards, for example, 9 recommendations accepted, 5 implemented. Individual service funds, 11 accepted, 4 implemented. Halifax and Brighouse bids, 5, 1. Highways and maintenance, 6, 3. I think it's those that we need to target on here and ensure that whether it's back to the timing issues or whatever it is, but I think it's those particular areas we need to focus on and get some proper reactions and action out of those particular areas. And my second is probably more of a question, really. When we have tracking reports where it's something has been rated as limited, and then in the next 2 or 3 columns across it says not due, I presume it's because there's a sequencing to these things. But if something is limited, is it appropriate to say it's not due and not do anything about it sooner rather than wait to when it's due? Does that make sense? So it's a question about limited and when we actually react and do something about it when there's a limited assessment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Lisa, do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. The column where it says not due is the control environment of the follow-up, which that indicates that we haven't done the follow-up work at the time of this report. That's not to say that action isn't being taken, because recommendations were made at the conclusion of the audit. So action is being taken by management to implement those recommendations. The reason why there's sometimes a delay in doing the follow-up work, usually we would do that within 3 months, after 3 months of the report being issued. But if the management response has indicated that actually full implementation of those recommendations is going to take more time, which we recognise and acknowledge that sometimes that is the case, we wouldn't do the follow-up work until we'd reached that point in time. There's no point in doing the work until we know that they've been implemented. Does that answer your question,
well,
Councillor Evans?
It's wording, isn't it? You know, if you said it's not due, it suggests that you're not doing anything. It's about wording, and clearly from what you're saying, is that you are doing something completed. Yeah.
Management are doing something. We're not doing the follow-up because that's not due yet.
Yeah. Okay. And as I say, I think we need to focus on those areas where we've got sort of a lag between recommendations accepted and recommendations implemented. I think we're generally in agreement with that one, aren't we?
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, generally in agreement with Councillor Evans. I do exception reporting, and I think the things that we should be bringing back to this committee is some further commentary about anything that's got a red mark on it. What we want to see is no red marks. So I'm interested in any of those to hear a success story or a frustration that we're not making progress, but whatever it is, I don't want to see the reds anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Bellinger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just basically trying to get a bit more of an understanding really with regards auditing of schools. Obviously new to this, so this is a bit of a learning curve. And the reason why I'm asking this is because we've got a school that's close to my ward. It's actually part of an academy which does sort of like take it out of our responsibility. However, it's had a really poor Ofsted report recently, but that Ofsted report actually has an impact on the community wide, and that will sort of like impact on where people decide to live or raise a family. Would something like that come under the auditing of schools or within auditing? I'm just sort of like trying to get a bit of an understanding, that's all. I'm mindful of time here, Chair, do you know what I mean? But it's just something that's come to my mind now whilst actually looking at this part of the report.
Thanks, Councillor Bellinger. Lisa, do you want to come in?
We wouldn't do the audit of the academy. No, that we wouldn't. The audit wouldn't be done as part of this. We would, as is in the previous report, we do offer a service to academies. Lachlan, do you want to add anything further on that with regard to academy work?
Well, I think, as you say, Lisa, we only provide a service to 4 academies. So unless it's one of those 4 schools, it wouldn't come under our, we wouldn't be included in our work. But and even if it did, it would be the governing body of the school that would be responsible for implementation of the recommendations. So yeah, I think that's the situation really. I don't think it's my concern.
I think if I just come back in, Chair, I think the reason why I've obviously raised this is, like I said, the impact that it has on the community and possibly the feeder schools as well to the academy. At the end of the day, you know, schools play an important part of the overall economy of an area where people decide to live, work, raise a family, where they're going to, which schools they're going, which primary schools they're going to send the children to, obviously then, because they're going to move up to that larger school because that's the feeder school. So this, something that's maybe out of our jurisdiction, can have an impact on the things that within our remit that we can audit, and that's really what I'm just trying to sort of like get my head around, how far we would go to do something here.
Thank you, Councillor Bellinger. There's nobody else indicating to speak. So the recommendations on this item is to approve the tracking report in the first instance, and to indicate whether any of the reports outlined within the tracking report require further action, which I think we've identified that we want to see a bit more of a targeted and maybe clear commentary on the accepted recommendations and the implementation of the recommendations, if I've understood that correctly. But also whether we would like further details of the report to be selected as the member selected report to be presented at a future meeting. Does anybody have any suggestions about what they may want to look at from that report as a member selected report? Martin.
Well, I just support and echo, I think, was it Councillor Lee that suggested the, which one was it? The individual service funds and the Brighouse and Halifax bids. Or somebody mentioned that those were 2 where there've been sort of, seems to be a lack of progress in terms of addressing the actions that have been agreed to. So those were the 2.
Sorry, Councillor Evans.
Oh,
yeah.
no, sorry, Councillor Evans, sorry, thank you.
Councillor Hay.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in the payments report, and I hear what Lisa said, where it's improved to reasonable. But I think just at least having a brief look at that, and then cross-casting it to Ernst & Young's view that they didn't see anything. I don't know whether it actually impinges on exactly the same area. Would be interesting.
Thank you very much. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on that and picking up on Martin's reference, for me, because things like town boards and the Halifax and Brighouse bids are unresponsive in terms of recommendation, acceptance and implementation, maybe then those are ones in which we should focus. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
What was it? Did you mention the individual service funds previously, or was it the town?
There were four. There were town boards, individual service funds, Halifax and Brighouse bids, and highway maintenance, who seemed to be the four that were standing out, being a bit of a data geek, because they're the ones where there was a relatively high level of acceptance, but relatively low level of implementation.
Yeah. Okay.
We did have town boards, didn't we? Was that the last time or the one before that? We've looked at that one already, and I suppose highway maintenance was on today's agenda, isn't it? So.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. Again, I'm just asking people to be cautious about some of this, because if you look at, we could just get too bogged down in some detail, because if you look at the Halifax and Brighouse bids, for instance, there's now only one outstanding item. There was 5 last time, and now it's 1, and so there is nothing in that last list that's red anymore. So again, I just think we risk overloading audit, I think, if we're not careful. So I'd just ask us to be perhaps a bit more selective about the ones we want to come forward. And I appreciate that in some of the others there are bigger numbers of actions that haven't been completed, but that one in particular looks like really it's pretty much got it down to 1, and I wonder whether that's perhaps not one to go for.
Sorry, am I misreading that? As I understood it, there were 5 recommendations accepted and only 1 of them has been implemented. If I'm
one implemented, yeah.
And therefore 4 have not been implemented. Am I misinterpreting it?
No, that's correct, Councillor Evans. You are interpreting that correctly.
Yeah, you are. Sorry, it's me who's got it wrong, and I appreciate that, but I still just would urge us to just bear in mind the colours on that last, the control environment at follow-up, and none of those are red.
Thank you, Councillor Dacre. Councillor Evans, is that a hand from before?
It is, I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem. Councillor Bellinger.
Yeah, just a quick one. I just didn't know if you were aware that last year we actually asked at place scrutiny boards that the bids were brought in to be looked at there. I just didn't want to make sure that there were any crossover of work. That's all with place and an audit committee.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bellinger. I'm also very mindful of crossing over into scrutiny remit as well with some of this stuff. So yeah, no, I appreciate your comment on that. Okay, members. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to move to approve the tracking report, and also to if we can have some more clear commentary on the accepting of recommendation and implementation of recommendations from internal audit for future. And also, I think that bearing in mind we want to look at highways maintenance again off the back of discussions for this evening, and in the interest of how many meetings we've actually got for the year, I'm wondering whether just 2 more, 1 or 2 more would be sufficient to look at as member selected reports, suggesting that is individual service funds and also the bids. All in favour of those recommendations? Great, thank you very much, members. That is carried. Okay, final item for this evening before you can all go and enjoy the rest of it. Audit committee work plan. Has anybody got any comments on this before we move to approve it? No. Okay, fab. The only thing on that is for us to approve it also, and to keep it under continual review, which I'll be sure to do alongside Lisa and Chris and others. And we will also work in an update on the member selected internal audit report on highways maintenance and the other two that we've recommended for this evening as well. If there's no more comments for this evening, may I thank you all very much for your patience and your contributions as well. And appreciating and acknowledging it was a very heavy agenda. We've done it just under 2 hours. So thank you very much for attending and for your contributions, and enjoy the rest of your evening.